Welcome to Resilience+Rise, the podcast where we transform adversities into triumphs and illuminate the extraordinary potential within all of us. I'm your host, Thomas Scaria, a resilience coach, an ultramarathoner, and a firm believer in your next most powerful chapter. This podcast is a companion to my upcoming book, Resilience Plus Rise 26.2 Transformative Miles to Unleash Your Marathon of Life Mindset, coming in early Feb March. As I just mentioned, extraordinary stories. What I talk about extraordinary is that what where we meet is ordinary people, but they have done something extra, and we call them as extraordinary. Today, it's my great honor to introduce Kal Dosanjh, a veteran police officer, over 20 years of law enforcement. He has been in the beat enforcement team for East Hastings, the Nook in Canada, wherein we talk about homicides, robberies, serious assaults, drugs, open air drug market, exposure to extreme risk. And he was in the midst of that. Downtown Eastside, as we all know it. Today, it's such a privilege having Cal. So, without wasting much time, in fact, I'm so excited you can see that particular thing that directly let's jump to Cal. Cal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Very happy to be here.
Fantastic. So, Cal, I know that you're stuck for time. So, let me just jump into it. You have been in the forces, you have been in the underbelly of what we call Vancouver to be. I mean, sorry if I'm using a wrong word, but a lot of people they do call that particular thing, and I think so. This morning I was listening to Ken Sims, the mayor, talking about how he needs to clean up the place. But from where you are and what you have come through to create Kids Play Youth Foundation, which is a huge undertaking. Can you give us a sense of the journey or just go through what this journey was all about?
Yeah, so Thomas, you speak very quite emphatically about the downtown east side. It's because you understand the different socio culture and socioeconomic dynamics that are involved down there. So having worked there for the majority of my career, so I'm coming into a big milestone for me in January of this year. I'm hitting 25 years with my law enforcement department. And so I spent a good portion of that as a beat patrol officer in the downtown east side. And it was during my time there that our duties essentially entailed, uh, obviously, apprehending suspects, criminals that are engaged in nefarious and illicit activity or criminal activity. So essentially, we'd be dealing with uh, people that were down there, which entailed drug dealers, which entailed gangsters, which entailed people just committing petty crimes. And you have to understand that this was all the underground black market of the downtown east side. So one sort of led to the other. Think about this for a second. When uh, you have a massive concentration of social housing in the downtown east side, which is essentially what Mayor Kens is talking about right now, but all concentrated within that 6 block radius. Essentially, who is that social housing for? And that social housing is for those that people are relying on welfare checks. You have buildings that are specifically designed for people that are experiencing significant mental health issues, and they have social housing that's been provided for them. And you take all these individuals and you bring them into the downtown east side. It's a recipe for chaos. Granted that there's some remarkable services that are being offered to these individuals down there as well, but in the same vein, imagine those that have mental health issues, that are dealing with a lot of trauma and dysfunction, and all of a sudden now you're introducing them to the open air drug market right there at their front doors. So clearly, I mean, they're going to self-prescribe themselves a lot of these narcotics, right, to deal with their own anxiety, their depressions, their bipolar, and they turn to the meth, the cocaine, the heroin, and the other drugs that are down there. And so it essentially amplifies the problem. And so when you're dealing with this massive surge of violence down there, drug addiction and substance abuse and organized crime syndicates that are operating down there and preying and taking advantage of those that are susceptible and vulnerable to this, once again, it's a perfect storm. And that's essentially what we'd be dealing with. And that's the reason why the open air drug market, as you referred to, was so massive. It's one of the biggest in all of North America down there. We talk
Really? Oh, okay. Maybe I was because I was thinking it was more towards New York, that particular area, or Chicago area, or down south. But I never knew that it was so rampant right in the heart of our city.
right in the heart of our city. And clearly, I mean, there's been numerous documentaries and numerous articles written on the downtown east side. It's because of this that you have this perfect storm that's happening down there because all the variables in the equation are lined up. And so having said that, it's a major issue. It's a major problem. Vancouver, at the end of the day, and I won't get too deep into this, is a port city. And so the majority of the drugs that are coming into Canada come through the West Coast, through our shipping routes and so forth. And so having said that, once it arrives here, it's subsequently distributed across Canada to other points. And so you have a lot of organized crime activity that's happening on the West Coast. And a lot of those drugs end up in the downtown east side. And the reason why I know this is not only from personal experience as an officer dealing with all this, but I've pulled out lots of high profile gang members from gang life that are now productive citizens of society, which who can attest to these very points that I have personally observed as well. And they can corroborate that a lot of the information is correct, that this is happening. And so when I was working in the downtown east side, I was once again bestowed with the responsibility of apprehending people put into the criminal justice system that might have committed a crime. And these people would be charged, convicted, do their time, and back out on the streets again. And this was particularly true of youth. You have to keep in mind that in the downtown east side, on the outskirts of it, you have a lot of youth that have been raised in trauma and dysfunction and living in welfare homes, lower socioeconomic backgrounds that have never been afforded opportunities in life. And so a lot of these kids would end up in the downtown east side to engage in the open air drug market. When I say kids, you're talking about youngest 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old that are coming into the downtown east side to take drugs or sell them or to hang out with drug dealers and gang associates. And so we'd be down there, and I used to see a steady stream of kids that were coming into the downtown east side, and it used to bother me because these kids would commit their crimes. I'd be responsible and the other officers for arresting them, pushing them through the criminal justice system with charges. They'd be convicted, put into youth detention center, and back onto the streets to re-engage in that cycle of violence, and we'd be at it again, arresting them again. And I just thought, you know what, this is crazy. Like, something has to stop, because I would return back to my locker at the end of shift. And I just thought, you know what, there was so much more we can do. And for me, policing is always about being proactive and not reactive. And part of the proactive element should be about educational awareness, that these kids that grew up in that kind of destructive, chaotic environment that come from chaos and dysfunction and trauma, of course they're going to end up there. I mean, they're a byproduct of their environment.
Environment. Hmm.
Yes. And so when they come down there and they're engaging in these acts and we arrest them, the general public and society points a finger at these kids and said, well, you do the time, you did the crime, now you do the time, and you need to suffer the consequences. And I always think to myself, well, those that are pointing fingers, how many of you guys took out the time and actually to guide and teach and mentor these kids? It's easy to quickly pass judgment and basically say, well, you should know better. I mean, how should they know better? Like, they take a look at where these kids come from. And so when all they've known is extreme violence and drugs, and in some cases their parents might be addicted to drugs. In some cases, some of them have witnessed their parents overdosing. In some cases, they've witnessed a family member dying from gang violence. So when you come from that, naturally they're going to gravitate towards the downtown east side and become part of that environment and become enmeshed in the fabric of that in that world. And so having said that, it was a couple of incidents that happened in the downtown east side where I drew a line in the sand and said enough was enough. Where I remember one, uh,
Can I just rudely, because that was my question. Sorry about it, Cal. Is that was there an incident that pivoted you to who you are? That you have been a person that's raising the flames. That hey, you know what? We can make the change.
yeah, of course. I mean, there was multiple incidents that happened. There's one that stands out. And essentially what it was, that was a tipping point, that incident. And so I was working the downtown east side in my police cruiser, and it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, quite raining quite heavily. I remembered it clearly. And I remember pulling into the lane close to Main and Hastings. And there was a young kid sitting by the garbage dumpster getting his crack pipe ready. And later learned he was 15 years old. He sees my police cruiser and he starts to walk away. And I know I had already made up my mind that I'm not going to apprehend him. Rather, I want to know what his circumstances are, where he's from, where's his family, where's his home, what's he doing here? What circumstances led him down this path? And so I get out of the car and I call him over, and he doesn't listen and he keeps walking. So I say it again. He turns around and he walks up to me and he puts his wrists up like that. And he goes, "If you're going to put on the handcuffs, do it now. Otherwise, I take it I'm free to go." And I say to him, I said, "Hey, look, you know what? I'm not going to put on the handcuffs. You are free to go. But before you go, I sincerely and genuinely want to know, where's your family? Where's your home? What are you doing out here?" And he puts his head down and he starts thinking about it because no one had actually taken out the time to ask him these questions. And he puts his head back up again, looks me in the eyes, and he said, "Tell me something." So instead of answering my questions, he posed the following questions to me. He said, "Tell me something." He said, "If your mom left you when you were young and you have no idea who she is or where she is," he said, "your dad's lying drunk on the sofa right now and has no idea where you are. And your only brother's sitting in jail for dealing drugs and there's nobody else at home." He said, "Where would you be?" And he was right. If I was in his shoes, chances are I'd probably be in the same place. But that was the tipping point for me. That was a moment of epiphany where I just realized enough's enough. Like something needs to change. So I called MCFD, which is the Ministry of Children and Families, and we got the kid out of that home and we put him in a group home, which was a far better environment. And I've been asked over the years what happened to the kid, and the honest answer is I don't know, because there's thousands of stories like that down there. But I'll tell you what he did for me. He changed my path. And I went up to my inspector the next day and I said, "Give me some funding so I can start running programs for inner city kids on my own time, on my days off." And I remember back in 2007, I received $500 so I could start running these programs. And so I started running programs for inner city kids on my days off. And that essentially became the impetus to create Kids Play Foundation.
Beautiful. And guys, if you're listening to this, I would be putting out the links of Cal down in the comments if it resonates with you. For me, it is even if one person, power of one, if one person also listens to our conversation and makes a change, let so it be. So have a look onto it. So, Cal, with this, I come to the very critical question to our podcast: is that what are y'all doing about Kids Play Youth Foundation? I know there is, I see on LinkedIn and the other social media, there's a lot of activities taking place. Can you tell me what are the current projects that you have been working on and what are the changes that has been happening?
There's plenty. So you have to keep in mind with Kids Play Foundation, we have 6 separate streams that we operate through, and that's education, sports, mentorship, environment, clinical counseling, and community patrol. And so we have chapters that run all across Canada. So we have major chapters in major cities, which include Vancouver and the entire Lower Mainland, and across BC as well. We have Calgary, we have Toronto, and around the world we have Colombia, India, Bangladesh, and Uganda. And yes, thank you. And so with respect to our 6 streams here, we got programs on the go all the time. Case in point, a week ago, we took over 50 families from Fraser Valley area to an event called Discovery Day. And what Discovery Day is, it's an event hosted by the Association of Mineral Exploration, and they put on an educational event for kids to teach them about mining and mineral exploration. And so part of our component, our educational component through Kids Play, is teaching youth about all the different opportunities that are out there for them and give them an educational experience, so, which includes educational field trips. So Science World, Aquarium, Discovery Day. When we take kids out to these kinds of places, it expands their academic horizons. And allows them a moment to explore outside of opportunities which would be normally afforded to them. And so the reason why I'm a strong proponent of early childhood development is because when I was dealing with a lot of the gangsters that were pulling out of that lifestyle, they all said the same thing. Had they been afforded opportunities to learn about different things when they were young, at an early age, they wouldn't have gone down that route. And so when I say early childhood development, grade 5, 6, 7, when you can connect with kids at that age and you can start instilling good values, those values stay with them for the rest of their life. They can retain those values. And so essentially, should they be presented with an opportunity to engage in any kind of illicit activity, they'll think twice, because we have provided them the educational awareness and the insulation to think about making positive choices. And so a perfect example of that, metaphorically, that I'll use is that in India, there's a thing called mahout, and mahout is elephant trainers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they do is when a baby elephant is born and starts to pick up strength and size, they tie that baby elephant to a tree with a rope. And that rope is strong enough at that moment to hold that baby elephant. And so the baby elephant will struggle and try pulling that rope and try to break it, but it can't. The rope is strong enough to hold that baby elephant. So it learns, that baby elephant learns that no matter what I do, I will not be able to break this rope. And that becomes instilled in
Exactly.
the elephant's brain. It is the same principle that applies to these young kids. If we are able to give them these good, solid values at a young age, it is the metaphorical equivalent of that rope. Because with the elephant, even when it grows to adulthood, over thousands and thousands of pounds, they still tie the elephant with the same rope.
Beautiful.
And it doesn't try breaking it.
So you just gave a metaphorical example, but when you look at your time with which is continuing, do you have any instances where you look at pride at the way some of the kids have changed their trajectory and continued with the light that you have been shining on?
There's millions of examples of that.
Wow.
And I mean, obviously, when I say millions, I mean, there's plenty of examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
There were kids that were sitting on the fence and going down that path. We were able to change that trajectory. Kids that were associating with the wrong people, because you got to keep in mind, drug dealers and gangsters have gone as far and starting to recruit from elementary schools. And when I say recruit, is it's not like they've set up a stand and table and say, hey, come and join us, be part of this gang. What they're essentially looking for is susceptible and vulnerable kids that are skipping classes. And that might be vaping behind a school, or these gangsters know that that kid is having troubles at home. And so what they do is they focus on these kids, or a kid that might be bullied. And so what they want to do is they want to expose those vulnerabilities
Mm-hmm.
and bring that kid into the gang slowly and groom them. And so what they essentially end up doing is telling the kids, hey, don't worry, we got your back. If you're having any kind of problems or issues, we will take care of you. We are your family now. And so you're part of a brotherhood or a sisterhood. You don't need to worry. And here's some extra cash. You know what? We'll take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
So when the kid gets a little bit of cash and he gets that love and attention from the wrong source, he is left with the impression, or she's left with the impression, that these people legitimately care about me and they consider me part of their clan, their tribe. And so I belong to something now. And that's a source of identity for them. So identity is a big thing for these kids, belonging to something that's greater than you. I think that's part of human programming
Of course,
and
validation.
validation. And so, but what ends up happening is they don't realize they're just a pawn on a chessboard. They're
Hmm.
just part of a larger game where they're being used. And so, a perfect example I'll give you is, and this is an actual case, was a 16-year-old here from Surrey that got involved in this lifestyle. So he was involved in dial-a-dope operations. And so, same thing, he had been identified early, pulled in when he was 15, 14, 15. And so he was doing a dial-a-dope operation for about a year. And they saw, when I say they, the bosses of that operation saw that he's a good worker and they want to keep it that way. They want somebody that's a hard worker that continues to work hard and deal their drugs. And so it's easy labor for them. And they're making the majority of the money. So the worker gets a small cut. The bulk, the
Hmm.
lion's share, goes obviously to the bosses and the syndicate. So they saw he was a good worker and they wanted to keep him. And they wanted to make as much money as they could from him. And so in this particular case, what they did is they called him into the office one day, the office, and they said to him, "Hey, look, we got a big shipment. We're going to give it to you. Why don't you take it from here to that person? And if you can give it to them without any issues, you know what? We'll pay you an X amount." I think it was a ridiculous amount, like 25,000,
For a
and
15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, that's huge.
massive. It was massive. And so obviously, what do you think he's going to say? No, of course he's going to do it. And so he said, "No problem. I got this. You know what? I will take care of this." So they give it to him. They give him the packages and they send him on his way. So this kid's on his way to a particular location to go drop off the drugs and take care of it for his bosses. As soon as he's gone with the shipment, the bosses, they call two of their other workers and they say, "Hey, we've given these drugs to this kid and he's going to this location and he'll be there by this time. I want you to mask up. I want you to get your guns ready and I want you to jump him. So once he gets there, take his drugs away." And you're probably thinking, well, why would he have his own two men go jump his own guy for drugs that belong to this organization? And you'll see why. So the two guys, they mask up, they have guns, and they're waiting in the bushes when this other guy arrives. And they point the guns, they take the drugs, no problem. And so the kid comes back, and the boss is like, "So what happened? Where's what's going on? Where's the money?" And the kid's like, "Well, I went to go drop off the drugs and collect the cash like you told me to, but there were two guys that were waiting in front with guns. I don't know how they knew that I was going to be there at that time, but they took the drugs. So I have nothing now." And the boss is like, "That's not my problem. That's your problem. So,
Exactly.
yeah, here's what you're going to do. You owe me that money for that drugs. And because I got to pay up too. And so you owe me 200,000." And the kid's like, 200,000? Like, I'm 16. Where am I supposed to get you 200,000? And the boss is like, "I don't know. Go get it from your parents. Tell them to refinance the house." The dealers knew that his parents owned property. And so that they could refinance the mortgage and get that kind of cash for him. And so that's exactly what he did. He was able to get about 100 to 150,000, I think, cash for these guys. And the rest he had to work off. And so this is exactly what they wanted. Not only did they get the cash from the kid, but then they also got him as a free worker that he can work off his debt. And this is what they did to him. And this is what I teach these kids these days.
Beautiful. Just being mindful of the time. I know you got to get into another meeting, but with your permission, Cal, I would like to continue this conversation at some other time, part two of what is expected, because there's so much of value in what you're saying. So I would conclude at this point of time, to be continued at another session. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Kat. And guys, wait for the next episode. So if this is interesting, I know the next one is going to be much more stronger. Let's wait for it. Thank you so very much. Let me just stop this.